Is a floor bike really enough to help you gain strength and range of motion? Let's talk about it today. So before we can get into the actual movement and exercise of a floor bike, I want to talk to you first about overload principle. And this is an important piece for this discussion. Overload principle is the principle that allows someone to make strength or range of motion gains by increasing the intensity of an exercise through various means. This can be through increased resistance, increased reps, increased sets, or increased frequency. Essentially, increasing the intensity of an exercise so that it challenges the muscle or joint. So if you're trying to improve range of motion, you can't improve range of motion unless you stretch a little bit. And that's going to cause a little bit of maybe discomfort or stretching type feeling. Same thing with strengthening. You cannot gain strength without stressing the muscle to a certain extent. You don't want to overextend the muscle so that you're causing an injury or anything like that, but you have to overload the muscle to the point that it does cause muscular fatigue or muscular challenge to the muscle fibers. If you don't do that, nothing will ever happen. So having said that, let's take a look at one of these bikes. Whoa! There's one right there. Glad we have that. So this little bike, there's various types. They can be very expensive, ones that are electronic, to very cheap like this bike here. They might have a little step counter. Some of them have little buttons to create resistance. Some of them just a twisty knob like this one. They're all the same thing, just more expensive, less expensive. They all do the same type of movement, type of exercise though. So if you want to try one of these, you're more than welcome to buy one, but we'll talk about whether or not that's going to be effective for you. All right, so we have the floor bike here. The first component is just putting your foot in. You put your foot on the pedal. A lot of times they'll have these little straps. Some of the nicer ones will have a platform you put your foot on. You can change the amount of knee bend based on where you place the bike. So if you slide that bike closer, you'll notice that's going to require more knee bend, okay? Versus if you put that bike a little bit further away, it requires less knee bend, okay? First, I want to talk about the cardiovascular component. So, if you want to improve your endurance, one of these bikes might be helpful because you can do a repetitive type movement which can increase your heart rate some. Often, in my opinion, these do not have enough resistance in them to really get your heart moving. So you can pedal a little bit faster, it might elicit a little bit of a heart rate increase, then it might help you some. So as far as a cardiovascular component, I would say these are effective if you have poor conditioning. And this is enough to get you breathing a little bit, enough to increase your heart rate. If you're in moderate to good condition cardiovascularly, it's probably not going to cause overload to allow for improvement. How about strengthening? Well, this little knob, you can create some resistance or you can loosen it up so it's not resistant. Creating some resistance by tightening it, making it more difficult to pedal. It does provide some level of resistance, so you kind of got to push through that, making a little bit of difficulty. But this kind of goes same thing on that overload principle. It's really kind of mild on how much overload this can produce. So I would say that unless you have poor strength, this is likely not going to create enough resistance to elicit strength gains. And how about range of motion? I want you to look at my knee as I'm going through this range. Extending out and sliding a little bit. It extends out, that's about how straight it gets, and there's about the peak bend. So this does not really stretch out that leg that way, so you're not getting a lot of extension type stretch out of the knee. You'll notice it does bring the hip up some, but That's not bringing it up that much to really stretch out that hip, and it's not extending the hip. So range of motion into extension and range of motion into flexion of the hip. So in other words, range of motion of extension of the knee or flexion of the hip, there's not a lot of movement there. It's not pushing it. It's not making it stretch at all. So it's not really doing that. It can, if you kind of bend it all the way, kind of peak bend, if you have some pretty significant tightness in the knee, this can help improve some of that knee bend range of motion. But that's if you have some pretty good restriction there, or I should say pretty bad restriction. If your knees are semi-limber, it's really not going to provide enough overload. Something I have done with patients that are a little bit weaker is use a bike like this, and I'll put an ankle weight around their ankles to make it more challenging. That increases the intensity of the exercise, so that can be helpful. But overall, is a floor bike going to be enough for you? I'm going to guess it's not going to be enough to elicit true strength or endurance changes unless your condition is on the lower end of things. If you're not very active and you're just starting to get into exercise, a floor bike would probably be great for you. Those are some things to consider when you're thinking about a floor bike as part of your regimen for exercise. I appreciate you tuning in. If you want to improve your balance, check out this video here. If you would like to increase your general strength and endurance, check out this workout here on the bottom. If you want a glute strengthening exercise, check out this video here. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to catching you next time.